Hello Nasdaq followers, and welcome to another edition of Nasdaq Spotlight. My name is Leanne Alfaro, and we're coming to you live from the Ping Identity Identify conference right here in Times Square, New York City. We're hearing from real enterprises talking about identity and security, as well as managing identity in multi-cloud platform environments. Joining us right now to talk to us a little bit more about it is Richard Bird. He is Chief Customer Information Officer at Ping Identity. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
So we hear this messaging from a lot of cybersecurity solution companies that identity is at the center of security. Is this new? I thought we'd been talking about this for a while.
Well, strangely, the reality is that identity hasn't been the center of security for decades. And the reason for that is not because it hasn't been paid any attention to. The reason is more about the evolution of technology to begin with. If we go back 40 and 50 years, technology was isolated both intellectually as well as physically. So when the first computer systems were used in a business setting, they were completely isolated physically, mainframes. They weren't connected to anything other than terminals. And intellectually, you needed to know a foreign language. You needed to know a programming language to be able to understand and manage those systems. And then as we kind of loop forward in evolution, we went from mainframes to client servers to laptops to mobile phones to watches and to refrigerators now, and everything is connected to everything. And the complexities of connection, as well as the addition of CPU and horsepower related towards memory and the ability to process faster, kind of all came together over the last several years, but still based fundamentally on this old idea that systems are isolated and technology is hard. But we can go out and literally buy any code that we need, and kids can code today, so the language barrier is down, and all of the systems are connected, but we still operate on this principle of access as administrative function as opposed to access as security. And now, as people have spent millions and millions of dollars in companies, billions of dollars in cybersecurity initiatives, they're finding that they continue to be hacked on the simplest exploits. They get hacked through phishing and social media or social engineering, and the identity of the person that gets hacked is taken over, and the hackers use that as an entry point to aggregate all these old accounts and all these old identities, and they become an insider. And as we're getting beaten by those types of exploits, there's all of a sudden becoming an industry-wide recognition that if we don't get identity right, everything else that we do in cybersecurity can't function correctly, and it won't protect us. So the rise of identity-centric cybersecurity has been more a realization of the weaknesses and gaps in overlapping controls in companies today, and less about we've always been doing it, or access is important, and then we run into the complex conflicts with ease of access. I don't want a lot of restrictions on my customers or on my employees for them to be able to get access to things. So we have to manage through a very complicated landscape with a very bad history relative to security-centric processes to elevate and to improve and to fix identity at that core of our security framework.
Talk to us a little bit about the gap here, because we've moved fast and really quickly in terms of firewalls and APIs. It was about speed and it was about building. How did we get to this space where we're so far behind in identity security?
So what's really fascinating is that in pure technical and solution terms, we're not far behind in identity. It is an issue of leadership, it's an issue of investment, it's an issue of focus, and because I've been a practitioner for a number of years. I've been a Chief Information Security Officer, a global head of identity operations, and I will tell you that when I have been in boardrooms and senior executive meeting rooms with my colleagues and peers that are over all of those other areas, threat and vulnerability and firewalls and encryption, they got well funded because the technology solutions there were sexy. They were cool. They were, and I would talk about, well, we really need to clean up Active Directory. We really need to focus on hygiene around our or our identity repositories. And the responses that I would get were, well, yeah, we'll get to that. But we need to buy a solution that fixes these problems. When in truth, the underlying information that we use to feed almost all systems that are associated not just to identity but security are coming out of systems that the identity aspects aren't well managed and maintained. Names are wrong, addresses are wrong. We wouldn't put that kind of data in any other system. Because of the way that identity has evolved, it's the systems that we're stuck with. And so it becomes less interesting to senior executives to put money and effort into what many folks already assume is fixed. And the challenge there, kind of going back to the same thing that I said earlier, the challenge is if you don't get identity right, and the frustration there is that the millions and millions of dollars that you spend in other cybersecurity solutions is suboptimized. Because if you can still get beat on a simple identity-related hack, but you've got all of this great stuff that's monitoring and encrypting and decrypting and in transit and at rest, you still got beat.
Right.
And that's a difficult thing for people to hear. But the great news is that companies like Ping have been, dealing with the evolution of technologies, facing customers' use cases and complexities, and really the market is going to be driven over the next several years by identity as a solution for a much broader set of problems, not just security, end user access, user experience, customer experience, and that's what's going to be a huge, huge driver in both the acquisition of these technologies as well as the investment in these technologies.
Now you're speaking to why identity is going to be put front and center. It's going to be a hot topic, which positions Ping Identify in a really great spot. But it's all trends that we've heard today. It's enabling the customer to focus on their job and not the process of how you're going to get there, while still securing the foundation, which you addressed earlier today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because enablement is absolutely necessary. But one of the things that is fascinating about being a security practitioner is a lot of times because we become enamored or in love with technology, whether it's our kids falling in love with handsets and our executives fall in love with iPads, we lose track of the truth, the universal truth that everything that we do in the digital is a reflection of what we do in real life or in the analog. So the example that I use frequently is all too often when I show up as a new employee, it's the equivalent of somebody handing me a key ring with 47 keys and saying, this is your identity. And identity has been treated as the summation of all of the accounts and passwords that I have under maybe one unified account, an SSO, and then that's supposed to be my identity. The problem is that if somebody takes any of those components away, they have access and it's not me. And this really brings about the most important aspect of why identity-centric security is going to boom. It already is, and it's because so many companies can't answer two simple questions. Are you who you say you are? Most important question. And second, do you have access to what you're supposed to have access to? And when we reflect this back to the analog life, we would never put ourselves in a situation where we would interact with somebody on the street, in the grocery store, in our school systems, around the corner, without having some sense of surety that you are who you say you are, and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Because if you're not, then we automatically have no trust with each other.
Right.
And those kinds of concepts in the analog are all too infrequently not reflected in the digital world, and yet we're used to them in the analog. We're used to being asked for our ID when we go into a building that nobody knows us in. We're used to showing our driver's license when we come through the airport checkpoint. We're used to all of these processes, so it means that we need to evaluate those processes in the digital that, they may create some inconvenience and some tension for an end user, for a customer, for an employee, but they're going to create a more secure environment. And when it's more secure, there's trust. And when there's trust, there's positive outcomes.
Absolutely. So I'm definitely looking forward to a future where everything is much more unified under your identity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for your insight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Had a great time.
Nasdaq followers, please stay tuned for more coverage right here from Ping Identity's Identify Conference.